Mercedes did not just get exposed for having a battery problem. They got exposed for having a battery problem inside the exact system that makes them fast. The governing body's assessment confirmed what rivals had suspected all along. Mercedes' real advantage is not their combustion engine. It is the electrical side, the hybrid deployment, the battery power, the part of the car that gives them their biggest punch. And now that same broad battery area has taken down Russell in Canada, Antonelli in Barcelona, and even caused trouble for McLaren as a customer team. That is not one failure. That is the warning sign of a system living on the edge. Mercedes are phasing in new modules, but until the fix is proven, every race has the same terrifying question. Did Mercedes build the most advanced power unit on the grid, or did they build the one thing that could destroy their own championship? Subscribe to the channel. To understand why this Mercedes battery story has become so serious, you have to start with the part everyone got wrong. People thought the question was whether Mercedes had the best engine. But that was never the real question. The real question was whether Mercedes had built the best electrical system. Because under the new Formula 1 power unit rules, the battery is not just supporting the car. It is helping define the car. It stores energy, releases energy, supports acceleration, shapes race pace, and gives the driver the extra force needed to attack or defend at the most important moments. That is why rival manufacturers were watching Mercedes before the season even began. Audi, Ferrari, and Honda were already concerned about the team's electrical deployment. They wanted to know whether Mercedes had found a way to extract more performance from the energy recovery system than the rules intended. The governing body held a technical meeting with the engine suppliers in January, but decided not to take immediate action. That decision mattered. Because it did not end the suspicion. It preserved it. The governing body said the evidence was still developing, and that changing the regulations too early could create instability before the first race. On the surface, that sounded reasonable. Formula 1 cannot rewrite rules every time a rival gets nervous. But in the paddock, the message was different. Mercedes were being watched. And when a team is being watched before the first race, every later problem becomes connected to that original suspicion. That is exactly what happened. Mercedes started the season with serious pace. Their car looked like the class of the field. Antonelli, despite being only 19, began building one of the most shocking rookie campaigns Formula 1 has seen in years. Russell was quick too, winning, taking pole positions, and staying deep in the championship fight. But while the results were strong, the electrical questions never fully disappeared. Then the additional development and upgrade opportunities assessment changed the story. The governing body's evaluation identified Red Bull powertrain's Ford as the benchmark for the combustion engine side. That meant Mercedes were not the clear leader in that specific area. They were actually far enough behind to receive an additional development opportunity. At first, that sounds like bad news for Mercedes. But it revealed something even more important. If Mercedes were not dominating because of the combustion engine, then where was the advantage coming from? The answer was the electrical side. The hybrid deployment. The battery system. The part of the car that rivals had been suspicious of from the beginning. That is why this finding was so powerful. It confirmed the shape of the Mercedes advantage. Not that Mercedes were illegal. Not that they had been punished. But that their real strength was coming from the electrical components, the very area not included in that combustion-focused assessment. And then the battery failures began making the same point in the most painful way possible. The advantage was electrical. The weakness was electrical. The weapon and the wound were sitting in the same place. That is why George Russell's Canadian retirement became more than a reliability failure. It was the moment the theory became visible. Russell was leading. He was fighting Antonelli. He had the chance to change the internal balance of the Mercedes season. This was not a quiet failure at the back. It was a championship moment at the front. Then the car suddenly died. Mercedes described a sudden kill of the energy recovery system. James Allison later explained it as an engine kill caused by a catastrophic failure in the battery. The battery had heat damage, and Mercedes needed time to understand exactly what had happened. That one detail, heat damage, opened the deeper fear. Because if the Mercedes electrical system is being pushed harder than anyone else's, then the battery has to survive more stress, more heat, and more demand. The whole system has to live in an extreme window. If it works, the car looks devastating. If it fails, the race ends instantly. That is the balance Mercedes are living with. Performance on one side. Survival on the other. And in Canada, survival lost. The consequences were enormous. Russell lost a possible victory. Antonelli won again. The championship gap shifted. Mercedes lost valuable constructors' points. And most importantly, the team could not immediately say the danger was gone. That is what made the failure so damaging. A normal mechanical problem can be isolated quickly if the evidence is clear. But Russell's failed battery module had to go through unusual safety procedures before being shipped back to the United Kingdom. The full investigation could take months, which meant Mercedes had to rely heavily on telemetry while waiting for deeper physical analysis. That delay matters. Because if you do not fully understand the failure, you cannot fully promise it will not happen again. And Mercedes could not afford uncertainty. Not with Antonelli leading the championship. Not with Russell trying to recover. Not with Ferrari beginning to close. Not with McLaren, a Mercedes customer team, also suffering electrical and battery-related problems. That customer element is crucial. Because when McLaren began facing electrical trouble, the story stopped being only about the works team. Lando Norris had issues. McLaren had already faced electrical concerns earlier in the season. If a customer team using Mercedes power unit technology is also seeing similar symptoms, the paddock starts asking a much bigger question. Is this a Mercedes car problem, or a Mercedes power unit family problem? That is a dangerous distinction. A car problem can be fixed inside one garage. A power unit family problem spreads across partnerships, supply chains, component pools, customer trust, and championship planning. That is why Mercedes high-performance powertrains had to treat this as a fleet issue, not just a single race disaster. Then Barcelona confirmed the fear again. This time, Antonelli was the one hit. He had just moved into second place behind Lewis Hamilton. He was on course for a valuable result. He was protecting the championship lead and showing again why Mercedes had become so convinced by his speed and aggression. Then his car stopped. Another power unit failure. Another lost result. Another Mercedes driver left with nothing to do but process a race that had been taken away. And suddenly, the battery problem had touched both sides of the factory garage. Russell in Canada. Antonelli in Barcelona. McLaren in the background. Same broad direction of concern. The battery area. That is when Allison's later comments became so important. He explained that the failures were not all identical, but they originated in the same broad part of the battery. That is one of the most revealing sentences in the entire crisis. Because it means Mercedes are not looking at a single repeated failure that can be fixed with one clean replacement. They are looking at a risk zone. A vulnerable area. A part of the system where different problems can appear under pressure. That is far more complicated. Think of it like a bridge that starts showing cracks in different places. One crack can be repaired. But if several different cracks appear in the same section of the bridge, the question becomes whether the entire design is under too much load. That is what Mercedes have to answer. Is the battery failing because of isolated defects? Or is the battery being asked to live too close to its limit? That is the real fear. And the governing body's assessment made that fear more dramatic, because it showed that Mercedes' competitive advantage was not rooted in the area everyone first assumed. Their combustion engine was not the absolute benchmark. Their electrical package was the major strength. So if Mercedes now has to make that electrical system easier on the battery, what happens to the advantage? That is the question rivals care about most. James Allison described a short-term and long-term approach. First, Mercedes tries to give the vulnerable thing an easier life. Then, while doing that, they work on a proper cure that lets them use it hard again. That sentence is huge. Giving the battery an easier life means reducing stress. Reducing stress may mean more conservative operation. More conservative operation can mean less performance. Maybe not everywhere. Maybe not enough to make Mercedes slow. But in Formula One, even a small change in how aggressively the electrical system can be used can affect overtaking, defending, acceleration, and race management. That is why rivals are watching. If Mercedes have to protect the battery, they may lose the sharp edge that made them dangerous. If they do not protect it, they may risk another failure. That is the trap. And it is why the first block of this story is not really about a broken battery. It is about contradiction. Mercedes' greatest advantage appears to be electrical. Mercedes' biggest reliability problem appears to be in the battery area. The car is fast because of the system. The car is vulnerable because of the system. That is a nightmare for any championship team. Because you cannot simply abandon your biggest weapon. You have to fix it without weakening it. And until Mercedes prove they can do that, every race becomes a test not just of speed, but of trust. Can Russell trust the car after losing Canada? Can Antonelli trust the car after losing Barcelona? Can McLaren trust the Mercedes power unit after suffering electrical problems? Can the team trust the new modules before they are fully proven under pressure? And can rivals trust that Mercedes are truly vulnerable enough to attack harder and force the issue? That last question may decide the next phase of the championship. Because when rivals smell reliability weakness, they do not wait. They push. They force battles. They make the leader defend. They make the car deploy energy. They make the system work harder in exactly the moments Mercedes might want to protect it. That turns the battery problem into a strategic weapon for everyone else. Ferrari will know that. Hamilton will know that. McLaren will know that. Red Bull will know that. If Mercedes are managing, attack them. If Mercedes are protecting temperatures, pressure them. If Mercedes are hiding a weakness, make them use the system. That is how a hidden technical problem becomes visible in the race. Not through a report, through pressure. And that is why the governing body's confirmation matters so much. It gave the paddock the missing context. Mercedes' combustion engine was not the whole story. The electrical side was where the performance advantage lived. And now, Mercedes' own reliability crisis is happening in that same broad battery world. So the suspicion has evolved. At first, rivals wondered, how are Mercedes getting so much electrical performance? Now they are wondering, can Mercedes keep that electrical performance without breaking the car? That is a very different question. And it is much more dangerous for Mercedes. Because the first question threatens regulation. The second threatens the championship. This is where Russell and Antonelli become part of something bigger than their own rivalry. Russell needs the full system to fight back. Antonelli needs the full system to protect his lead. But Mercedes may need to protect the system from itself. That means the drivers could be asked to manage the very thing that makes them fast. And drivers hate that. They want the car alive beneath them. They want everything available when the moment comes. They want the battery, the deployment, the traction, the power, the full punch of the Mercedes when the race is on the line. But if the engineers are worried about heat, if the module is vulnerable, if the risk zone is not completely eliminated, then every full attack moment becomes loaded with fear. That is not how dominance is supposed to feel. Dominance is supposed to feel inevitable. Mercedes' dominance now feels conditional. Fast, if the battery survives. Dangerous, if the module stays cool. Championship winning, if the new parts work. That is why this story is not going away. Because the governing body confirmed the electrical nature of Mercedes' advantage, Mercedes confirmed the battery area nature of the failures, and the championship confirmed the cost through lost points. Those three things connect. They form the core of the crisis. And until Mercedes break that connection, the paddock will keep asking the same question every time a silver arrow looks fast. Is this the race where the electrical weapon wins again, or the race where it finally turns against them?